Welcome to this edition of Sustainability Karma. I'm your host Rajiv Tikoo. Today we have a very special guest with us, Dr. Abi Tamim Vanak. He's Director for Center for Policy Design at ATREE. ATREE is the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment. Welcome, Dr. Vanak.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I would like to talk about what are these open natural ecosystems?
Open natural ecosystems is a term that we coined, my colleague MD Madhusudan and I, to describe India's ecosystems that are naturally treeless or not heavily treed like forests. So these include savannas, grasslands, desert ecosystems, sand dunes, rocky outcrops, plateaus, etc., which don't naturally support forests. And they are quite vast and they're spread across a fairly large geographic area of India.
We understand that COP30 expanded the scope of nature-based finance mechanisms. Do these also impact open natural ecosystems also?
So technically, they should impact open natural ecosystems and should include them as part of the NBS solutions package. But thus far, what's happened is that even though ONEs directly contribute to climate mitigation through soil organic carbon sequestration and are really vital for climate adaptation in dryland systems, we have seen that these areas tend to be used as places that are open for tree plantation, for example. So nature is seen through a very narrow lens of what is as of mostly forested landscapes or tree-based restoration. Whereas these areas don't require tree-based restoration, they just require restoration for the system that exists there, which in this case is it could be savannas, it could be grasslands. So it's important for us to then look at restoration and solutions that are local to that context and not impose a vision of a land that's alien to that place. And in fact, that can have negative consequences for restoration. We need to align them with all the UNCCD, UNCBD, and UNFCCC targets and priority areas.
Classification seems to be an issue affecting open natural ecosystems. What can be done there?
So yes, classification is the primary issue, at least in India. In the rest of the world, they have classified them as grasslands and savannas as they exist. But in India, particularly, we face a colonial legacy because when the British first came to India, they saw these areas as being degraded forests. They didn't imagine that India had vast savannas, just like Africa did, even though they hunted a lot of the savanna species in India. So they hunted the black buck antelope and the chinkara and the cheetah, but did not associate that these are the natural habitats for these species, and therefore called them wastelands. And unfortunately, that wastelands categorization continues to this day. And because they are called wasteland, then clearly you have to convert them into not waste. You have to convert them into something useful. And we are trying to change some of that perception. We are trying to improve the valuation of these habitats and these ecosystems to improve in the eyes of policymakers, but as well as the general public. Because we have always grown up hearing about greening the desert, for instance, as a good thing. So we've tried to bring policies that will bring water to the desert. But what we don't understand that deserts are not something that are formed due to degradation, but due to climatic processes over thousands, if not millions of years. And therefore have evolved as those ecosystems. And the people living in them have also evolved and adapted to those harsh climates. So for example, in Rajasthan, there are, innumerable water harvesting structures that people have. So people have learned to live with scarcity. And so by artificially bringing water from other places, you're actually destroying those climate resilient systems. And you're actually creating problems now because you're turning the deserts soil saline by over irrigation. You are actually playing with the monsoon system itself because you're cooling down the surface essentially. And so climatic models show that when you cool down the desert, the hot air that's required, the surface temperatures that need to rise to create the low pressure areas might even then have impacts on monsoonal rainfall. So these are, of course, early simulations by some scientists, but It just goes to show that we have to understand some of these systems properly and not just try and mess with natural systems as per our whims and fancies.
Open natural ecosystems are as important in storing carbon as forests, but there doesn't seem to be sufficient recognition of this fact. What can be done?
Yes, so this is really important, and this is critically important. Open natural ecosystems, including tropical savannas, tend to store as much carbon as tropical forests do, but only in the below ground layer. So the comparison is for below ground carbon. Above ground carbon, obviously, forests will store more in trees. Now, the reason these areas don't have forests is because there's not as much rainfall here, and that's the primary factor, because obviously rainfall is not as high in the semi-arid areas. That's why they're semi-arid, as in the wet monsoonal forest areas. Now, where you can't support forests, you can't try and plant a forest either, because you don't have enough water. So this is where, in fact, the below ground carbon becomes very important. And this carbon is being stored in a very water efficient manner. It's also important because it can't be removed easily. So it's not lost easily. It's not, like a forest fire can't come and destroy a grassland. All that will burn away is a little bit of above ground, the grasses that are there, but all the root structures, all the soil stored inside all the carbon stored inside the soil continues to persist for a very long time. And it's important for us to measure that, to evaluate that, and to include it in our land degradation neutrality as well as uh, Paris Agreement calculations, so that when we are reporting this at the national international stage, we know what we're doing. Also, it will free up a lot of land for us in terms of meeting our LDN targets. There's more than 10% of India's land mass which is there as open natural ecosystems. And so, if we start restoring grasslands there, improving soil carbon there, we'll actually go a long way in meeting our LDN targets.
Development and afforestation both are affecting open natural ecosystems. How do we really strike a balance now here?
Again, this is something that we are really it's a challenge for us to face. In terms of development, it's actually irrigated agriculture that's the number one cause of land use conversion historically for open natural ecosystems, because these have always been, because they've not got the protection that forests have, it's been very easy to convert these landscapes for agriculture and for other purposes. The newest uh, large scale challenge to these is the deployment of renewable energy. Now, obviously, we need renewable energy, but where to site it, how to make it nature positive, are all new conversations that we need to have with the government as well as with the renewable energy companies, so that they don't see these as wastelands that can just be converted whole scale into solar farms. The second part is afforestation. Now, you know, we have been trying to grow forests in drylands for more than 50 years, and we have more or less failed. Because it requires enormous amounts of water to grow trees. So if you look at plantations that have been done 30, 40, 50 years ago, you will find that they've very rarely succeeded. But because we want to measure greening by planting trees, we keep going to plant trees in the same areas where we have not succeeded before. So this is something we need to reorient ourselves, recalibrate, saying that, just planting a sapling does not mean anything. Instead, you need to choose where to plant what species of tree. So the mantra is the right tree, right place, right reason. And replace trees with other vegetation forms. It could be grasses, shrubs, or just let nature take its course. Let natural regeneration also happen in that place. Where it's required, you can do what's called assisted natural regeneration. So all these options are available for us, and we need to start thinking about them in a more holistic manner.
When it comes to open natural ecosystems, what kind of evaluation are we talking about which could really emphasize upon policymakers and others the importance of such systems?
So I will give you some very brief statistics about this. 53% of India's milk production and about 74% of its meat production comes from these landscapes. And that's an approximately 1.3 lakh crore annual benefit. That's just the economic valuation. And so this is enormous. Now let's understand also that this comes without any huge input by the government. So this is a low input, um, very climate resilient uh, form of economic production that that is actually the backbone of the rural economy, because not only do people raise livestock and provide meat and milk from this, but then the outputs of this, the organic manure that comes out of this, goes into our agricultural system. Otherwise, imagine that in the absence of this organic manure, what would be the fertilizer requirement in these lands? Further, by using organic inputs, we are reducing soil degradation, we're improving soil health. So that is also there, which has not been evaluated correctly. So all of this comes from the fact that animals are grazing in open ecosystems. They are free range, extensive livestock production, not from stall feeding and not from growing fodder in agricultural areas. So it's a very very large economic benefit that accrues. Also, it provides livelihoods to some of the poorest and most marginalized communities in the country. In addition to harboring really important biodiversity and the carbon sequestration.
I refer to invasive species. How do we really create more awareness about not going ahead with invasive species?
This is one of the largest challenges that India's native ecosystems face, that the threat of invasive species. And invasive species have historically come in for a variety of reasons. They were actually actively brought in some cases. For example, what's called Prosopis juliflora. In Gujarati, it's called Gando bawal. In some places, it's called Vilayati kikar. So this was brought in because it was assumed to be a drought-tolerant, hardy species that grew easily. And now it's impossible to eradicate almost. The other one is Lantana camara, which is spread throughout our forest areas. Others came in with food grain imports, things like Parthenium. So, these species, we don't, or we need to have a very strong policy to ensure that what has come should not establish. If it is established, it should be removed. But also, we should to prevent the importation of species that can potentially become invasive. So we need to have better quarantile regulations. We need to have stricter rules and regulations of what people can bring in, what people can plant. Because currently all our, and this is not just for plant species, but also for animals, we're actually actively trying to plant new species in India. We are importing them from across the world and trying to plant them. And we don't know which of these has the potential to become the next invasive species. So we need to have a really strong policy to be properly Swadeshi. We have an enormous variety of species that we can propagate in India. And we need to think Indian, be Indian in this case also. It's not just about plants, it's also about animals. And also, we have to recognize that not everything within the geographical boundaries of India is native to that geography. By being native, you can't take something from South India and plant it in Rajasthan, and vice versa. You can't take something from the mainland and put it in the islands. Those are also invasive there. So they are locally invasive. So that can also happen. So we have to be very careful about all of those things.
How practical is there a case for making pastoral communities central to preservation of
It's
natural
absolutely
ecosystems?
essential and vital. In fact, most of our ecosystems, open natural ecosystems that are persisted today, have done so because of the dependence of pastoralist communities. They are the first line of defense. And unlike, they're basically they move their animals with productivity, with the monsoon. So they never degrade the landscapes beyond retrieval, unlike sedentary pastoralism or any other form of land use rules. So they're really compatible with this kind of ecosystem, and they add to the value of these areas because obviously, the livestock grazing on these lands provides nutrient cycling and so on. Uh, we don't have those large herds of wild animals left anymore. But in many places, the livestock of pastoralists are the only source of food for species such as the wolf, for example. And so pastoralists are actually very key to maintaining these open ecosystems and the biodiversity that's embedded, that's there in them.
Finally, how do we compare with the global community, whether it's laws, policies, or practices in this space?
So, globally, again, grasslands have been the most threatened wherever we go in the world. But in India, India is sort of unique in the sense that it's actively destroying them through policies such as calling the wasteland and not recognizing their value. So we've seen that only 5% of India's open natural ecosystems are included in the protected area network. And even now, open ecosystems are being actively converted to other uses. So we really need to change our policies. We need to come up to, so for example, if you imagine going to Kenya or South Africa and looking at those open vast savannas there and say, oh, these need to be planted with trees or this should be converted to solar farms, we would be aghast at that. But we openly do that in India. So we need to really value these systems better. Bring some of them, the most important ones, need to be brought under some legal framework so they're not converted at large scale. But at the same time, we have to ensure that people's dependence on them continues in a manner that's sustainable.
What got you to work in this space, which is not really a sexy space? And I'm sure you did it decades back when probably people didn't know about these issues.
So, my interest in open ecosystems and savannas sort of really started, that journey started when I was doing my master's at the Wildlife Institute of India, way back in 95, 97. And I was actually studying tigers then. And it happened to be in a savanna landscape, which was the Panna Tiger Reserve. So that's when I got to see tigers living alongside dryland species such as the Indian fox and chinkara. And many years later, when I wanted to do my PhD, I was focusing on dryland species such as the Indian fox. And that's when I realized that, the savanna landscapes that the Indian fox inhabits are completely unprotected. And that's when I saw that they have been labeled as wastelands. And so since then, so this is about the early 2000s, I've been writing about this and I've been trying to get some policy interventions in that recognize the importance of these landscapes, not just for foxes, but also for one of our most endangered birds, the great Indian bustard, but others such as the Resa floricum and many others. And now, of course, the government is bringing the cheetah to be the flagship of our grasslands. And so we need to think about the landscapes that it will require. And we have to start planning for those landscapes now. We can't wait for 5 years or 10 years, by which time most of these savannas will have been lost. So we need to start planning for that right now if we need to protect these landscapes.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Vanak. It has been wonderful talking to you.
Thank you.
We hope you like this program. We look forward to your feedback on our WhatsApp number 9818120554. For participation in this program, write to us at sustainability.karma@gmail.com. Looking forward to meet you again at the same time next week with a new episode and a new guest. Till then, goodbye from all of us. Sustainability Karma.